Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin daf Kuf Yudalad. This is the daf for Shabbat. Before we start, I want to go back to something that I wasn't clear about at the end of yesterday's daf. When we talked about the Shmuel really hold Isur Halal Isur, that if there's one prohibition already and then a new one comes added, it actually is a prohibition and you're going to get lashes for it. But doesn't Shmuel say in a different case there isn't Isur Halal Isur in the case with the Truma and the Kohen? So let me explain it more clearly how the case of the Truma and the Kohen is a case of Isur and Isur Halal Isur. We start off and we have Truma that became impure. Now when Truma becomes impure, you have to burn it, you're not allowed to eat it. But if you eat it, you don't get the death penalty. So that's the first prohibition. Then the Kohen became impure. When the Kohen becomes impure and now wants to eat the Truma that's impure, well, it was already forbidden for him to eat the Truma that was impure when the Kohen was pure. So that was already the first prohibition. Now generally when a Kohen who's impure eats Truma, if the Truma is good, he'll get the death penalty. But here he's not going to get the death penalty because it was already forbidden to him because the Truma was impure. Now that he's impure, we don't get the death penalty for it. So that's how the Isur Chal Isur works there. Okay, but now let's go back to where we ended. We ended with this machloket, do you get lashes or not for cooking chelev, forbidden fats, with chalav. So the first way to explain the machloket, do you get lashes, don't you get lashes, was either Isur Chal Isur, we can't have a prohibition, it was already prohibited because of chelev, but now it's prohibited because of the got cooked with milk, so you get lashes, or any Isur Chal Isur, or it doesn't, and you don't get lashes because we don't add one prohibition onto another. Then we went to the second option, and we're now going to go through the other two. We're going to have 4 options altogether. And each of these 3 options, the 3 additional, are going to assume that any Isur Chal Isur, according to both these sides, both Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, any Isur Chal Isur. Okay, but then we're going to have to explain, then why would you get lashes on this? So the first explanation, if you remember, was, well, you're going to get lashes on the cooking of it, right? Because the cooking, you weren't forbidden to cook chelev. Remember, the whole machloket was about cooking chelev and chalav. So since it's not prohibited to cook chelev, it's just prohibited to eat it, it's only one prohibition, and you're going to be obligated. So what about the one who says you don't get lashes? You should. Well, you don't because it called, right, bishul really meant also cooking and also eating. Why did they use the same word? To say, well, if you're going to be obligated if you're not going to be obligated for eating because it's one prohibition on the other, then you won't be obligated for cooking it either. And that's why you won't get lashes. Now we're going to go with the third option. Top of our daf, second line. Ikada amre, some people say, abishul kule amalu pligi delake. It's the opposite of what we just said. On cooking, everyone agrees you're going to get lashes, or it's like a mirror image. So why? Cooking, for sure you're going to get lashes for the reason we just explained, because cooking is only one prohibition. Ki plige achila, their machloket is about eating. And it's going to be the reverse of what we just said. Manda amari no loke. If you say you don't get lashes, it's very clear. Daha ein isur chal isur, because there's 2 prohibitions. One is to eat the chelev, one is now to eat it with the chalav. You don't get on eating it with milk. Umanda amar loke lahachi afka rachmana laachila b'lashon bishul. The one who says you get lashes for cooking, for eating, even though ein isur chal isur, but since in this case they combined in one word lo tevashel, don't cook, also eating. So, kevanda abishul lake, since you're going to get lashes on cooking in this case, cooking the chelev, because it isn't a prohibition on a prohibition, there's only one prohibition, achila nami lake. Well, then in this case, you'll also get lashes on eating. So it's the reverse, because the last one we just said, if you aren't going to get lashes because of the eating, then you're not going to get lashes for the cooking. This is if you are going to get lashes for the cooking, then you are going to get lashes for the eating. V'ibay tema, fourth, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention this is very important. In the third option, it says the machloket's only about eating, which means you have to change the wording, because we said the machloket was hamevashel chelev b'chalav. If you cook chelev b'chalav, one said you get lashes, one said you don't. What it's going to have to be is you cooked it and ate it, and it's on the eating part, even though it says cooking, but it's cooking and then eating. So now we're going to say the fourth option is they actually don't disagree. One was talking about the cooking element, and one was talking about the eating element. So one was saying you get lashes because you cooked it, and on cooking there was no previous prohibition to cook, so that one you'll get lashes. The other was actually talking about if you ate it, on the eating you're not going to get lashes. Okay, so there's 4 different interpretations about how to understand that machloket. Now we're going to bring a meitive, a difficulty from a braita. Only the last line of this braita is important. On 3, and on the last 3, we said everyone holds ein isur chal isur. And on the one before that, we said, then the first one of the sides is ein isur chal isur. So this is a difficulty on all those opinions that hold the ein isur chal isur. That there is no prohibition on another prohibition. They're going to raise difficulty from this braita. Meitivei. Hamavashel b'mei chalav patur. If you cook in whey, okay, that's the liquid that comes out of the chalav, like the juice of it, sort of, you're exempt. Okay, that is not chalav. Okay, this isn't so relevant for our purposes, although we will go into this for a drop in another minute. Dam shebishlo b'chalav patur. You're not obligated on blood. We saw this before in one of the drashot. Okay, blood that's cooked in milk, you're not obligated for. Hatzamot v'agidim v'karnayim v'tzlafayim, bones, sinews, horns, and hooves. Shebishlam b'chalav patur. They're not meat, so you're not obligated if you cook them in milk. However, and this is the important one, hapigul v'hanotar v'tameh shebishlam b'chalav chayav. But if you have something that was pigul, you had a thought while you were doing your sacrifice in the temple that while you were slaughtering it, you thought, I'm going to sprinkle the blood tomorrow, which you're not allowed to do. It's pigul, and you can't eat it. Or notar, you leave it over beyond the time you're supposed to eat it. Or tameh, it became impure. Sacrificial meat that became impure, you have to burn. So they were already forbidden, and now you cook them with chalav, with milk, chayav. There you're obligated. Now, why are you obligated? Ein isur chal isur. So they say, very simply, Hai Tana savar isur chal isur. Okay, that Tana obviously held, like we saw before, that there was an opinion that you can add another prohibition when there's an already pre-existing prohibition. So that was an easy way to resolve it. And with that, we're going to move on, but we're not moving on to a new topic. We're going to go back to the beginning of that braita about the whey. Hamavashel b'mei chalav patur. So this braita says you're exempt for eating, right, cooking your milk in whey. Misayeh le'le Rish Lakish. This supports the statement of Rish Lakish. Titnan, as it says in the Mishnah, mei chalav harehin kechalav, v'hamochal harehu keshemen. Okay, the whey is like milk. Okay, this doesn't sound like it's the same thing, but that it's going to prove it, but let's hold off. We're going to basically use this braita that we just learned as a proof for what Rish Lakish is going to say. But before we get to Rish Lakish, we're reading a Mishnah. So the Mishnah says that we treat the whey like milk. V'hamochal, and the liquid that comes out of the olives, like there's some, like not exactly the juice of the olives, but some of this liquid that appears on the surface of the olives, harehin keshemen. This is viewed like oil. Now the context of this is oil and milk are both one of the 7 liquids that if it spills onto something, right, if you pour it onto something, onto produce, it creates susceptibility to impurity. Before that, right, when you cut produce in the field, if you don't put a liquid upon it, it's not susceptible to impurity. So if someone impure touches it, nothing happens. But once a liquid comes upon it and then someone touches it, then it becomes susceptible to impurity. So, Amar Rish Lakish, Loshanu Ella, this Mishnah that talks about the whey being like milk and the liquid of the olives being like oil, is Ella Lahachshir Tazraim. It's only for susceptibility to impurity purposes. But when it comes to, this is what Rish Lakish said, when it comes to basar b'chalav, milk and meat, the whey is not considered milk. And with that, we basically prove that this statement of Rish Lakish can be proven from that braita that we just saw, that whey is not like chalav. Because remember, this was Rish Lakish's comment on a Mishnah that didn't have anything to do with basar b'chalav. And he said, and yeah, it really doesn't have to do with it because it's not applicable. And the braita that we saw just before proves it. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to have more drashot on b'chalevi mo. B'chalevi mo. So again, this sugya assumes one time it's mentioned for itself, don't cook in its mother's milk, and then it appears 2 other times. We're going to have one braita that darshans it in one way, another braita that darshans it in another way, and there we'll have our 3. Okay, even though we've said we've already darshaned it in 3, right, each one in different ways, but there's a whole bunch of different ways that people darshan these 3 mentions, and in different manners, and learn different things. So this is going to be an interesting sugya. It's now a little bit complicated. We're going to have a lot of kavachomers and drashot, and each time they're going to basically say, how do we know this? Well, it's learned from a pasuk, and then they say, and it's learned from a kavachomer, but learned from the pasuk. And then the Gemara is going to say, I understand, if it's learned from a kavachomer, then you don't need it to be learned from the pasuk. And then they say, oh no, because you could have, and Rav Ashi is going to come each time and say, oh, you could have actually knocked out the kavachomer. Okay, so kavachomers are always a little confusing, right? So stay focused. Tanu Rabbanan, b'chalev imo ein li ela b'chalev imo. It says in its mother's milk. Sounds like only the mother's milk, right? A gedi, a kid in its mother's goat. B'chalev parav urachel minayin. How do you know that if you cook the meat in the milk of a para or rachel, a cow or a sheep, how do you know it's going to be forbidden? Amarta kavachomer. We're going to learn it from a kavachomer. Uma imo shalone esraimo barba. Now, in all this kavachomer is going to compare something and say, look, this is not forbidden in this way, and yet it's forbidden basar b'chalav, or we're going to do different kavachomers, but this one we're going to say like this. An offspring with its mother is lenient, a kal, because it's not forbidden to mate them together. Now, from the laws of kilayim, okay? Meaning, if you have, right, in the worlds of kilayim, you can't take two different types and crossbreed them together. But a gedi and its mother are the same type. Now, if something's the same type, and yet they're forbidden, the basar b'chalav, right, we're going to say, and yet ne'esraimo b'bishul. Now, we assume, what's the problem with cooking milk and meat? We're taking two different things and putting them together. It shouldn't go together. So if normally an animal and its own offspring are the same type for laws of kilayim, and it's not a problem to crossbreed them, those two types, it means they're close to each other, meaning, and yet we're going to forbid them basar b'chalav, right, the milk of one with the meat of the other. That means even though they're similar, they're still forbidden basar b'chalav. So here comes the kavachomer. Parav rachel, if you want to take a parav rachel with this gdi, the milk of that, right? So the animal themselves, a parav rachel, a cow and a sheep, ne'esruim obar, they're so different from the goat, the baby goat, that of course they're going to be forbidden to crossbreed. So if they're already so different and disparate from each other, then all the more so they should be forbidden to cook. Talmud Lamal. Okay, so therefore it's obvious that the para and the rachel are forbidden. Then they say Talmud Lamal. That's why you have the pasuk b'chalev imo. Now this makes no sense because the chalev imo is to bring in the para and the rachel, but we already taught the para and the rachel from the kavachomer. So the Gemara asks, "V'halam alikra." Okay, we finished the brayta. We now say, what did they need the pasuk for at the end of that brayta? Ha'atyale. They already learned it from a kavachomer. So here comes Rav Ashi, and he answers the question. Amar Rav Ashi, mishum de'ika lameimar mi'ikara dedina pircha. From the beginning, this kavachomer didn't make any sense. Why? Mehecha kamaiti la. Where'd you learn it from? Mi'imo, from the mother. Mali'imo shkenes sa'imo b'shchita. But the mother and the offspring is worse. You said they're better because there's no prohibition of harba'ah, of crossbreeding. But there's a prohibition, we learned in our Masechet, avot ve'beno lo tishchitu b'yom echad. Don't slaughter them both on the same day. So, Tomar Parasha, lo ne'eschaim o b'shchita, right? It's not forbidden. The para is not forbidden to slaughter on the same day as the kid. So they're actually in a better situation. So maybe you wouldn't think that they'd be forbidden. Basar b'chalav. Talmud Lamar b'chalev imo. That's why you need the pasuk. Okay, that was drasha number 1. Para v'rachel learned by drasha and kavachomer, but the kavachomer could have been knocked out. Tanya Ida. We're going to do the exact same thing now with another braita. B'chalev imo, but not to teach a different halacha, but the same structure. So then we got with its mother. What about its older sister? Amarta kavachomer. So again, they're going to start with a kavachomer. Now you have to understand. Here is maser behema. Maser behema is when you take 1/10 of all your animals and you give it to you have to sacrifice it in the temple. Anyway, the point, without getting into all the details of maser behema, we'll learn them more in detail later. But the idea is, once a year you do this, or I think you might do it more than one time a year, but either which way, you're only allowed to put in animals that were born in that year. So the first thing to know is an animal, we talked about 9-month baby in the Ben Pekua, but big animals, it's a 9-month gestation period. Small animals, it's 5. You could theoretically have an animal that gave birth in the first year of its life, which means you could have an animal with its offspring that both go in, what we're going to say in a second, badir lihitasel, in the pen, to be counted out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and take your maaser behema. Right? This whole maaser behema, that's what we say in Unatana Tokef, Mavir Tzono Tachat Shivto, right? Pass the God, we go like sheep, one by one, by the staff of God. It's because the shepherd would take his staff and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 as they'd all walk out of the pen. So, we're now going to say, now, Achoto Gdola is the older sister of this Gedi, that was born in a different year. So now we're going to see the mother and the offspring could actually be closer than the sister because they could go in the Dir Litasser together whereas the sister can't. Okay? So, if they're closer and yet forbidden basar b'chalav, then if they're more distant, all the more so they'll be forbidden basar b'chalav, and that's our kal v'chomer. We'll read it inside. She goes in the deer, in the pen, for maser. She could, theoretically, with the offspring, and yet nesrami will bishul. But even in a case where she goes in the pen with him, because could be not, but even in cases like that, the offspring is still forbidden with the milk of the mother. So achutosha lo nechnesaimo ledir letaser. So the sister, which can't, ein odin shenesaimo b'bishul, shouldn't she all the more so be forbidden in bishul? And that's the kal v'chomer. But just like in the previous, Talmud Lomer b'chalev imo. Well, chalev imo is mentioned another time to include this case. So now you have your three. One is for its own sake, one is the para v'rachel, and one is the achoto gdola, the older sister. To which again the Gemara says, "V'halama likra." What do I need a pasuk for? Ha'atile. Didn't you just teach it in a kal v'chomer? To which they answer, "Amar Ravashi mishum de'ikala meimar mi'ikar didina pircha." Because you could have said this actually made no sense from the beginning. Mehecha kamaitila. Where are you going to learn it from? Me'imo. But mali imosh kenes chaimo b'shchita. But the mother is forbidden b'shchita. Otovet beno. Again, the same idea. Tomar b'choto gdola shelo nes chaimo b'shchita. But the sister is not forbidden b'otovet beno. You can slaughter them on the same day. So that's not a good kal v'chomer because there's a stringency in the mother that doesn't exist in the sister, and therefore maybe that's why the basar b'chalav is forbidden with the mother but not with the sister. Talmud lomar b'chalev imo, and that's why you need the drasha. Okay, so at this point we have two drashot. One to teach the para and rachel, the cow and the milk from the cow and the sheep, and one to teach the older sister. But now we're going to get a little complicated because the Gemara is going to say, wait a minute. So first they're going to ask, Eshkachana choto gdola choto ktana minayin. I get that you taught now a choto gdola from b'chalev imo, but where are you going to get a younger sister? Atya mi benaya, right? That was born in the same year. So they say Atya mi benaya. You could say we'll learn it from the sister and the mother case. The fact that the sister's milk is, the older sister's milk is forbidden, and the mother's sister, we're going to go with what we call a b'mahatzab. What's the common denominator? Because each one has a chumrah, and it's going to be knocked out by the other. And then we'll say the least common denominator is this, and that's true also for the younger sister. Titi mi'imo. Well, right, so mehe titi, which one are you going to learn it from? Titi mi'imo, if you say from the mother, mali mosh kenes ra'imo b'shchita, but the mother has a stringency. That's otovet b'no, don't slaughter them both on the same day. But achoto gdola tochiach, but the older sister will prove that, because yes, it's true, otovet b'no is forbidden, and they're forbidden basar b'chalav, but also the older sister isn't forbidden to slaughter on the same day, and yet she's still forbidden to basar b'chalav. Right, her chalav is forbidden to the gedi, right, to mix the two together. Now you'll say, wait, but the older sister has the stringency. She can't go in the deer with the gedi, and the younger sister can. Well, imo tochiach, but the mother will prove it because the mother goes in the deer and is still forbidden basar b'chalav. So the combination of the two, chazar adin lo rizeh kirizeh v'lo rizeh kirizeh, the stringency in each isn't in the other, so that must not be what's actually causing the issue. Causing us to say, because of that, basar b'chalav is forbidden. Hatzara shaveh shebehen, the least common denominator is shu basal, it's meat, v'asur l'vashal b'chalav, and it can't be cooked in milk. And that's how we get the achoto ktana. So afani avi, achoto ktana, shu basal, v'asur l'vashal b'chalav. So since the common denominator between the mother and the older sister is that, also the younger sister has the same criteria, and we'll say it's forbidden. Okay, that sounded good. Now we're going to start to shake the foundations here. If you're going to already learn the choto ktana from the combination of the mother and the older sister, you didn't need a drasha then for the older sister, because you could have learned the older sister once you have the first drasha of the para and rachel, and you have the mother. You could have learned the older sister from a combination of the two, because you could say, the mother is asur tovet b'no, and maybe that's the reason why it's asur basar b'chalav, but the para and rachel aren't forbidden to slaughter in the same day as the goat, the baby goat. So that's not the chumrah, and the stringency of them that they're forbidden to crossbreed, but the mother's not forbidden to crossbreed, so each one cancels each other out. In the end, they're both just meat, and they're forbidden to cook in milk. So we should, or they're milk and forbidden to cook in meat. We should be able to learn the older sister from there. And why did you need a drasha for it then? To which the Gemara says, Inachinami, you know what? You're right. Ela b'chalev imo lamali. So then really, why b'chalev imo? So now we're going to have to, because all together, there's 3 b'chalev imo. 1 for its own sake, 1 for the parah and Rachel, and now what's the third one for? It's not for achoto gdola. So, lamali, meba'ale l'chedetanya. We need it for another braita. B'chalev imo, okay, we're going to turn now to Amud Bet. Ainli ela b'chalev imo. Okay, now this is a little bit complicated, so bear with me. Hi atzma b'chalava minayin. Where are you going to get that she's forbidden in her own milk? The meat of that animal with her own milk. Amart kavachomer. Uma b'mkom shelo ne'asar pri and pri b'shchita. Okay, we're now going to do pri with pri. It's going to mean a few different things, so bear with me. Pri and pri at this point means offspring and offspring. 2 brothers are not forbidden to slaughter on one day. Only the mother and the offspring, not the 2 brothers. So lo ne'asar pri and pri b'shchita, that's the lenient one, and yet ne'asar pri and ma'em b'shchita. So pri and pri is not forbidden, but pri with the mother is forbidden in Otovet Beno. Okay, so we have 2 brothers are not forbidden, but mother and brother are forbidden. Makom shene'asal pri and pri b'bishul. Now here it's going to get tricky. Pri and pri is not 2 brothers with cooking, because there is no. It's pri. Now pri could mean the offspring. It could also mean something that comes from the mother, which is the milk. So the whole basar b'chalav is pri and pri. So if pri and pri, we said by Otovet Beno is lenient because there's no prohibition to slaughter them both in one day. But when it comes to basar b'chalav, it's pri and pri that are forbidden. It's offspring that came from the mother and the milk that came from the mother. So ein odin shene'asar pri ma'em b'bishul. So all the more so, you should forbid the pri with the mother, okay, which means the milk of its own, the milk of the mother with the meat of the mother. Okay, so it's pri and pri is lenient. And pri ma'em is strict in Otovet Beno. So in basar b'chalav, if pri and pri is what's forbidden, then pri ma'em should be forbidden as well. Talmud Lomar, but just like the other drashot, it's because of the pasuk says b'chalev imo, and that teaches you that she is forbidden in her own milk. But halama likra ha'atela. Again, same question. But why do we need a kavachomer? We just learned it from. Why do we need a pasuk? We just learned it from a kavachomer. Now, in this case, it's going to be a little different because instead of Rav Ashi appear right away, we're going to have 4 attempts in this case to disprove the kavachomer and say the kavachomer is problematic. But the first 3 are going to be rejected. Okay, they're a little bit confusing, but hopefully I'll explain it clearly enough. Amar Rav Achtavoy bar Ami. So the first one is Rav Achtavoy bar Ami comes and says, Mishum de'ika l'meimar, because you can knock out the kavachomer and say, I'll show you that this pri and pri being lenient, more lenient than pri and ma'em, because Otovet Beno is just not true. Because I'll give you a case of pri and pri that's more strict than pri and ma'em. What's the case? We're going to talk about, again, crossbreeding. If you have a sus ben susia, you have a horse, son of a horse. Okay, the mother's a horse and the son's a horse. But achi pirda, but the horse of the mother mated with a donkey and gave birth to a mule, a pirda. So he has a brother who's a pered, and he's a sus. Now, his mother is a sus. Now, where's the crossbreeding going to come into play? What's worse? Pri and pri? Yes, that's worse. And we were trying to say that was better in Otovet Beno. But here, asur pri and pri, mutar pri and ma'em. The sus can go with a susa, his mother, and can be mated with someone like his mother, but can't be mated with someone like his brother. So the one that's his brother is actually worse. That's the pri and pri. And that goes against the kavachomer. To which the Gemara rejects this and says, this is kind of arbitrary because hatam zer ha'av hu garim. There's some external circumstance that caused the pri and the pri to be worse than the pri and ma'em, but not because of any halachic thing. What does this mean? Well, it's all because of the father who was a donkey. That's what caused the problem here. And we'll show you why this is irrelevant because we could switch around the case and it'll be the exact reverse, which is deha pere ben susya chi pirda yochiach. What if it's the mother's a susa, a horse, the offspring, and she mates twice, okay, we're going to see, with a donkey, and gives birth to 2 pradim, okay? 2 offspring that are parents. So in this case, mutar pri and pri, the 2 brothers are permitted to each other, a parrot and a parrot, right? They're both of the type that they can mate with each other. Vasur pri and ma'em, but the mother's a susa, she's a different type. And that's all, right? So it's arbitrary. You gave a case, but it's not a halachic difference that a pre and pre is always going to be more strict, because pre and pre is only going to be more strict when the father of one of them is different from the father of the other, and that's going to cause the difference in terms of which one they're forbidden to be with. So that's not to prove that pre and pre is generally more strict than pre and ma'im. So that didn't work. Because that's what we're looking for in the end. Because remember, the Kal Vachomer setup, pre and pre is more lenient in the world of Otov Epinot. You can slaughter them both on the same day as opposed to the mother, which you can't. So we have to find some knockout to that Kal Vachomer where the pre and pre is actually more strict. So we tried that, but that was very arbitrary. Next, and this is going to be the same type of thing, and you wonder why they're doing this, because it's also going to be rejected for the same reason. Ela Amar Marbarei Doravina. So second is Marbarei Doravina. He says, Mishum De'ika Lamemar, Eve ben Shivcha Achim Shucheret Yochiach. The slave, son of a Shivcha, of a maidservant. Okay, now let's get into the world of slaves and maidservants. These are Avadim and Shvachot Knaniyot, Canaanite ones. When they're a slave, they can only mate with slaves. When they're freed, they actually become Jews. Okay, because they're like pseudo-converts, and when they are freed, they become full Jews. So they're not really converts, but when they're free, they do become Jews. We'll talk about this another time. But the point is, then they can't mate with slaves. They can only mate with Jews. So, an Eved ben Shivcha, if the son is a slave and the mother is a maidservant, but Achim Shucheret, but his sister was freed. So Asur Pri and Pri, he can't mate with his sister or anyone like his sister. Forget about, right? Can't mate with his sister anyway. It's his sister, but not just anyone like his sister, free people, free slaves, because freed slaves are now Jews, and he's a slave. But mutar pri ma'en, but he can mate with people like his mother, because his mother's a slave woman, right, a maidservant. So there you see, pri and pri is more strict. But obviously that's only because it's situational, right? Hatam get shichur hu de kagarim. That's because she got a get shichur, she got an emancipation document. That's what caused it. But it's not because halachically pri and pri is worse. And here we'll give you the flip case, just like we did in the previous. If it's the slave, the son of a freed person, right? If the mother was freed after he was born, right, as a slave, and his mother was freed, and achi shivcha, but his sister's still a maidservant, shemutar pri and pri, there he'll be permitted with his sister, vasur pri ma'en, but he'll be forbidden with his mother. So it's completely arbitrary. That doesn't work. Okay, third, which will also be rejected. Ela amarav idi bar avin. This is a bit of a weird one. Mishum de'ika lamemar kil ez ra'im yochichu. When you have two things that are different types, this is like harba'ah by animals, crossbreeding. Now we're going to have crossbreeding in plants. Shasur pri and pri. Okay, two things that grow. If they grew together, right, they're going to be forbidden. Now, why are they pri? Because that's what pri is, right? Pri is it grew. So we have seeds that we planted that now grew, and they're both forbidden because they were planted next to each other. Right? Two different types. Umutar pri ma'en, but the pri is permitted with its mother. Who's the mother? Mother Earth. Okay, where did the pri come from? It came from the earth. So if I plant just one seed in the ground, right, one type, I can eat it. Okay, and that's the pri with its mother in the earth. That's why it's a little weird. It's not exactly a mother, but it's Mother Earth. Now, what do you see here? Pri and pri is forbidden. Pri with the mother is permitted. So there you see, here we have pri and pri is worse. But they say, what are you talking about? This doesn't work for a different kind of reason than the last two. Klum nesar pri and pri el al yedei ha'em. But the pri and pri, when you say these kilei Ezra'im that grew are forbidden, they're only forbidden together with the mother because they were in the earth. You need pri, and earth in order for it to be forbidden. Da'achite v'sari. What if you took chitim and solim? Okay, you took wheat and barley, bekada, and you put it in a jug. V'lo mitzasru. They won't be forbidden. It's only the combination of them with the earth that's forbidden. So it's really pri with pri and aim all together. It's all three of them. So that's why it's so harsh and worse than just one type of seed in the ground. But that doesn't mean the pri and pri in general is worse than pri and ma'im, so that didn't work. El Amar Rav Ashi, here comes Rav Ashi with a different pircha. This is a bit different than his other ones. Mishum di'ika lamemar ma lepri and pri sheken shnei gufim tomar b'pri and ma'im sheken guf echad. Logically, it would make much more sense to forbid pri and pri, the gedi with the mother's milk, rather than the mother with its own milk, because the mother with its own milk is one type. It's all one body. It all came from her body. Maybe those two things aren't forbidden to be with each other. So the whole logic of this kal vachomer is undermined by the whole theory here that, oh wait, we're trying to talk about two different things. Pre and pre are two different things that maybe came from the same person, but they're two different things. They're two distinct units. Whereas the mother's milk is all coming from one, it's all the mother. So you might have thought, and that's why you need lahachi, it's mishum hachi, it's drichkra, and that's why you needed the pasuk. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next section, which is a big, interesting section, and it's all about how do we know basar b'chalav is forbidden to eat and forbidden to benefit from. Now, like I said earlier a few days ago, we have this big famous drasha. It said 3 times, lo tfashel oti b'chalev imo, one for isur achila, one for isur ana'ah, one for isur bishul. Right? Can't cook, can't benefit, you can't eat. Or can cook, can't eat, can't benefit. Now, that is very famous and well known, but we already just saw that we had a whole bunch of ways of darshaning the 3 times it's mentioned in other ways. And now we're going to see there's other ways to come up with the prohibition to eat. So, Amar Ravashi, minayin lebasar b'chalav shasur b'achila. Today we're only going to get to the first, but we're going to have a slew of answers to this question. So how do you know basar b'chalav you can't eat? Because it only says don't cook. Shneamar lo tochal kol toeva. Don't eat anything despicable. So that's a pasuk in the Torah and Dvarim. Kosheti avti lecha hareu b'bal tochal. Anything that's disgusting to me, that I said is disgusting, don't cook milk and meat. If I say don't cook it, it becomes disgusting. Now you can't eat it because of that other pasuk. Ve'en li ala b'achila. Okay, that gave me eating. Now later in tomorrow's daf, we're going to get to this difficulty. Wait, everything that I do that's the transgression, I can't eat then the product of it? That's not really true. But that's basically what we're saying right now. They say, okay, that's for eating. What about benefiting? How do I know it's forbidden to benefit? Kid Rabbi Abau, the Amar Rabbi Abau, as Rabbi Abau says, the Amar Rabbi Abau, Amar Rabbi Elazal, anytime it says don't eat in any form, it means don't eat, don't benefit. Unless, okay, because there are exceptions to this rule, only if the Torah tells you you can benefit from it, like it tells you by nevela, which we're going to see in a second. Otherwise, there by nevela it says don't eat, but you can benefit. So if it doesn't say but you can benefit, then you can't benefit. And that's why once we say it's lo tochal kol toeva, that comes to include basar b'chalav that was cooked together. Therefore, you automatically, it's, you can't benefit because it doesn't say you can. Okay, now, what's by nevela? Leger b'nitina or legoy b'michra. You could give it to a ger. This is a ger toshav. It's not a convert. It's a person who's living in the land who keeps the 7 Noachad laws. You can give it to them or sell it to a non-Jew. Okay, now we're going to see the pasuk and a braita about the pasuk. The braita and the details the braita goes into aren't really necessary for our purposes. We're just trying to show that you can benefit from nevela. But in any case, we're going to get in and show you a machlokah between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, and with that, we'll finish our daf. Detanya. As it says in a braita, lo tochlu kol nevela, don't eat any nevela. La ger asher b'sharecha titnena va'achala, give it to a ger in your gates, and he will eat it. O mechor lenachri, or sell it to a non-Jew. Ein li ela leger b'nitina legoy b'mechira. Now, this seems like I can only give it to a ger or sell it to a non-Jew. Leger b'mechira minayin. How do we know I can sell it to a ger also if I want? I don't have to only give it as a gift. Talmud lomar. Now we're going to have play with the punctuation in the pasuk. Where do you put the comma? Lager, right? We said lo tuchlu kol nevela. Give it to the ger. Lager asher b'sharecha titnena, comma, or sorry, titnena ve'achala, and he'll eat it, comma. O mechor lenachri, or sell to a non-Jew. Now we're going to read like this: Lager titnena ve'achala, o mechor. Give it to a ger or sell it to him. And then after you read the pasuk the other way, also you put it the comma earlier. Legoy b'nitina minayin. And how do I know I can also just give it to a non-Jew? Talmud lomar titnena o mechor lenachri, because the titnena o mechor lenachri, right? Then we say, put aside the first part about the ger, and then you just read it as give it to or sell it to the non-Jew. Okay, and that's how we get you could do one or the other. Nimtza. Now, by the way, what's the benefit here? Because either you're getting money from the sale or you're giving it to someone, and that's a benefit also because they'll owe you something later. Nimtza chager v'chagoy bein b'mechira bein b'nitina dever b'meir. Meir says it could be one or the other. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Dvarim Kichtavan. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. The nevela. Now again, this has nothing to do with our purposes. Of course, it's permitted to benefit. But what we want to know here is, how can you benefit? So Rabbi Yehuda says, it's only the way it says. Lager b'nitina v'lagoy b'mechira. You give it to the ger or you sell it to a non-Jew. You can't flip it and sell it to the ger or give it to the non-Jew. So my time at Rabbi Yehuda, what's his reason? If you read it more like Rabbi Meir, it's either or. Should have written, don't eat any nevela. Give it to a ger who's in your gates, and he'll eat it and sell it. Okay, not or. O lamali. Why do you need the O in the pasuk to say this or that? Obviously, to differentiate. It's either this or that. Shema mina l'dvarim kichtavanu da'ata l'ger b'nitina or l'goy b'mechira. From there, you can infer it's exactly the way it's written. Either give to the ger or sell it to the non-Jew, not both. Not flipping them. Rabbi Meir, who thinks it is flipped, so what does he do with the O? Hi O. L'hakdim nitina deger l'mechira degoy. He says the O is to tell you better. The ideal is you should first give it to the ger. If you don't give it to the ger, then you can sell it to a non-Jew. But you should better do it in that order. For Rabbi Yehuda, so what's Rabbi Yehuda going to say to that? I don't need a pasuk to tell me that. That's just logical. Because you're supposed to help the ger. Your responsibility is to the ger, people who are living among you, who keep the Shabbat Noachai laws. We have a responsibility to help them sustain them. So obviously then, if you have an nevela, the ideal is to give it to the ger rather than sell it to the non-Jew. So I don't need the O for that, in which case the O comes for him to distinguish between the two and say this or that and not both. Okay, with that we finish our daf. The next section is a siman for these 5 difficulties we're going to ask that I already told you before. Lo tochal kol to'eva, what everything that's despised by God because you did a sin to do it is going to be forbidden to eat. That's actually not true. Okay, but just to review in backwards order for a second, we'll just review this last again, then we'll go back to the beginning. Rav Ashi is basically the first one to give a reason. It's actually strange he's the first because usually Rav Ashi is at the very end of the sugya, and we'll see we're even going to get later to Tanaitic sources, which is weird because usually we start with the Tanaim and then get to the Amoraim in chronological order. But this time we start with Rav Ashi, who says the source for not eating basar b'chalav, the fact that it's forbidden to eat and you'll get lashes for it, is lo tochal kol to'eva. And from there we just assume it's forbidden to benefit because anything that's forbidden to eat is forbidden to benefit unless you're otherwise told, like nevela. Okay, but let's do the review from the beginning. We started with this mivashel chela b'chalav, which in the end said maybe the machloket isn't even mivashel chela b'chalav, right? You get lashes or don't get lashes. Maybe it's even eating and not the cooking of it. But we have 4 ways to understand the machloket. Then we moved to, we got off a little on a tangent about the way because we had a difficulty from a bright on this idea of ein isur chala lisul. You don't have a prohibition, another prohibition from the pigul and notar. And in that brighta we talked about the ways, so then we got on a bit of a side tangent with that. Then we had this 2 brighta, which in the end turned into a 3rd brighta because the second we rejected. But the chalevi mo comes to include a para, the milk of a para and rachel, of a cow and a sheep. And chalevi mo comes to include the achotok dola. And we said it wasn't the achotok dola, it was actually to include a milk, in the meat of its own, right, in its own milk, okay, from the same animal. And each time we had a kavachomer and a pasuk. And then we said, why do you need the pasuk if you have the kavachomer? And then it said, well, Rav Ashi said we could reject the kavachomer for each time he gave a reason. Only in the last one we had actually 3 other reasons which were all rejected. And from there we moved on to the Rav Ashi that we just ended with now. So with that, we finished today's daf, wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.